I'm here today with Justin Welsh. He's helped build two companies to over $50 million in recurring annual revenue, managed teams of over 150 people, and raised over $300 million in venture capital. Then in 2019, he burned out. So for him and his wife, that meant quitting their high-paying jobs, redesigning their life to live with more intention. And now he runs his own solo business, helping entrepreneurs and creating digital products for creators like myself. He's also an angel investor, a mentor, and today I'm happy to have him on the show to pick his brain about his philosophy, systems, and automations that help him run it all. So Justin, do you think that was a good introduction? I took it from your website, most of it.
It was great, man. No, it was great. Lucas, it's really good to talk to you, man.
Could you perhaps tell us a bit more about that journey that you took from the professional background you had into becoming a solo entrepreneur that you are now?
Sure. I got started in sales out of school in 2003. And for the first, let's call it 6 years, I wasn't very successful at that. I worked for 3 different sales companies, pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, and I got fired from my first 3 jobs. So by the time I was about 28 years old in 2009, I had not accomplished a whole lot that was meaningful. And that kind of all changed when I broke into technology. I got hired by a company in New York called ZocDoc, and that would start sort of this 10-year journey into tech where I started at sort of an entry-level account executive, worked my way up to reporting to the CEO at ZocDoc, and then eventually parlayed that into my first executive role as a VP of sales at a company called Patient Pop in 2015, and then spent 5 years there growing the business from its very first dollar in revenue up to a little over 50 million in recurring. And that sort of those 2 things together, ZocDoc and Patient Pop, were just like really, really intense, really, really long hours, hard work, a lot of stress, especially at the executive level. And in late 2018, it sort of all culminated in December in this panic attack that I had. And it wasn't just like a normal one. It was like, call 911, get the EMTs out there, like just really, really difficult. And that was like this very big signal to myself that it was time to start living a different way. And so I went back to my job at Patient Pop, told my co-CEOs that it was time for me to go, and ended up staying there about 8 more months. But I started to put into position or into place this thought of working for myself, and I had never done that before. And so started writing online because I figured attention would be the best thing I could get for my new business. Turned that into a consulting business, and over the last 3 years, it is transformed into something very different than what I had intentioned. And, here I am today, 3 years later. In 2 weeks, it'll be my 3-year anniversary of being self-employed. And it's been a crazy journey.
Sure, it has been, and I am happy to have also seen some of it. Of course, I am part of a large number of happy customers. I found you through LinkedIn and inspirational content that you post on there. The thing that interested me about what you just said here is how this burnout that you had was also associated with some very serious events like a panic attack. I've experienced one myself. I fortunately did not need to go to the EMT for it, but it was a real bad experience. It was also largely due to stress, long hours, also in sales. There's a lot of parallels that I see with myself with what you just said. A lot of people listening may be thinking, okay, long hours, stressful, entrepreneurship. At least the stereotypical image of an entrepreneur is one that also includes those, perhaps even more so than with a job that's working for others, that's a bit more stable on the surface. Why did you still decide to go for entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think when I started to get into it, I looked at it as a break. So to be like clear, when I started writing online, I thought, okay, well, I'll transition out of my executive role and I'll do the next natural thing, which will be to be a consultant for similar companies to the companies that I worked for. But I assumed that I would do that for, 6 months, maybe 12 months at the most, and then go back to being a VP of sales or a chief revenue officer or whatever, company would hire me next. What I started to figure out is that I didn't love consulting either. it's sort of like working a 9 to 5, right? You're getting paid hourly generally, or getting paid for a project. You're still working long hours. Like, so that in and of itself is not that drastically different than maybe working for somebody else. Where things really started to change was when I started to understand how to productize certain things that I was doing. And so, there was this sort of secondary thing that happened as I was writing on social media to attract consulting clients. I was also getting a lot of traction on social media. People were just enjoying the writing. And so I sort of pivoted towards that and decided, okay, I'll start focusing more on social media and building these little like digital products and things like that. And as soon as that started happening, suddenly I was no longer trading my time for money. I was writing content, pushing content out, going out and enjoying my regular day to day, and payments were coming in via Stripe and Gumroad. And I was like, oh, this is a much different way to live. How do I make sure that this doesn't get taken away from me? And so I think the reason that it's much less stressful for me to be an entrepreneur than it is to be an executive is because when I was an executive, I was always at the beck and call of the board, of the CEOs, of the meetings, of my team. And so there was no stopping. Work was like 24/7. Someone always needed to get a hold of me. Whereas with this job that I have now, I can set up content for the next 2 weeks, Lucas. And if I want to log off social media and go on a trip, I might not make as much money because I might not be engaging as often, but I'll still be making money. I'll still be able to enjoy myself. Nobody can tell me that I have to be at a certain place at a certain time. And to me, that's the less stressful part of it. And now, like I mentioned earlier, I'm just trying to make sure nobody takes that away from me. And so that's the goal, is survival now.
Sure. No, I get it. Once you've got a taste of it, then it's hard to go back. It's really about freedom. That's the key word that I'm hearing here. The freedom from a lot of those commitments that stress a lot of people out, even if they are well-intentioned, even if you're working with a great team and all that, even if the company culture is great, it's still this pressure that you experience of having to be present at all times. A lot of people counting on you. That is also if you run a more traditional business that has employees. But this is truly about solo entrepreneurship. And when it clicked for me, that was actually just a couple of weeks ago. I've been following you for quite a while. I read this article on a page called Category Pirates. I don't know if you know them.
Very well.
Right. And they had this piece which explained that through the internet, you can monetize your knowledge, and they called it intellectual capitalism, where your knowledge can become an asset if you create content around it, which is exactly what I'm doing on this channel, which is what you're doing. You're helping others while doing so, and they are standalone lead generators at least, or money makers at best. And it seems to be getting a lot of traction. How has your work philosophy changed from pre-solopreneur and now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's my philosophy before this was I always wanted to be the best, reach the top, break the ceiling, do more. I'd gone from entry-level salesperson to chief revenue officer over the course of 10 years. And that was always sort of how I thought about things, was just trajectory upwards. Now I'm still motivated. I think to call myself unmotivated would be not true, but I'm motivated in a very different way. And the way that I'm motivated isn't to make more, do more. It's to make about the same and do a lot less. And so my whole work philosophy right now is to do what I want, when I want, and with whom I want. And I've been able to do that by building these multiple different streams of revenue. And the reason that I've been able to be confident and a little less stressed is because when I was at my executive job, I was always sort of 1 or 2 bad quarters as a sales leader away from getting fired. And then you go from 100% income to 0% income. Now with 5 different revenue streams, knock on wood, it would be awfully strange to lose all my customers overnight, right? I've got 10,000 plus customers throughout my different businesses. And in order to go from 100% of my money to 0%, they'd all have to fire me in one day. And so the likelihood of that happening is so unlikely that it's a lot less stressful to be in this position and to focus on the things that I want, which is working less, spending more time with my wife, spending more time outside. And that's what this new job allows me to do.
I love it. Yeah, do what you want, when you want, where you want, in whichever orders. But that's what you said. I love that as a philosophy. And it's more of a life philosophy rather than a work philosophy, and work
For sure
becomes the vehicle to achieve it rather than being the number one thing, which especially in sales, I mean, we could probably have a whole nother conversation about all the things that come with being a salesperson or a sales leader. Like you said, being fired is just 1 or 2 bad quarters away, let alone the commission check, which depends on you succeeding for just one party, your employer, rather than, like you said, thousands or tens of thousands of customers who are able to buy your online course, which you obviously made a lot of effort to produce it. But once you did, there are no additional costs for each extra customer coming in. You don't have to ship anything. It's digital. You don't have to spend time with them because that's not part of the product. That's your coaching offer, which is actually an upsell if you want to. This model, it works for you, but more importantly, or equally important, I would say, it also works super well for all of your customers.
For sure.
Yeah.
I try and have as many different offerings as possible that fit learning styles, price points, timelines. So if you want to just learn on your own at your own self pace, you grab a course. If you want to jam out for 45 minutes and go deep on, your audience or business, you grab a coaching call. If you want to write better, you grab the templates that are a subscription product. If you want to, meet other people, you join the community. Like, there's just so many different things that people can do based on their learning style. And so I'm trying to think about that downstream is how do I offer more, price points, learning styles, and do it in a way that kind of aligns with my mission, which is to provide access to everybody across the world to build these types of businesses. So that's sort of how I think about it.
That's very cool. And it's especially cool because everything you just said as a model can be applied to so many things, so many subjects, so many passions. And I remember in your most recent newsletter, you speak about embracing your obsession. Perhaps you could elaborate a bit more on that, because I feel like there are many people watching that are very knowledgeable in one particular skill, but they are either afraid or they don't yet know how they can turn that into a living.
Yeah, it's the caveat is that not all obsessions can be monetized.
Right.
And
sure.
So the whole thing is, this all kind of comes off of a mistake that I see a lot of people make. And that mistake is people go into business for themselves by essentially professionalizing, their skills that they had, or monetizing their professional skills that they had at their 9 to 5. So for example, someone might be a sales manager, and they come out and they say, okay, I don't want to be a sales manager at a company. I want to, coach other sales managers as a consultant. And they're like, great, I'm going to work for myself. It's going to be amazing. And what happens is they go out and they start doing that thing, only to realize that they're not really that interested in being a sales coach once they've removed themselves from their prior role. Not everything that we do at work and the skills that we acquire in our professional lives are things we're actually truly interested in outside of delivering it at work. And so people move from 9 to 5 to entrepreneurship only to find out they don't like the work they're doing. And just because you're working for yourself doesn't mean that you like the work that you're doing. And so they start slogging through pointless, client calls, and they're delivering projects they're not that excited about, and they're writing content they don't care about that much. And pretty soon it feels like a 9 to 5. Not that much different. You're doing things you don't like to do. And so for me, it's all about monetizing an obsession. So for example, I came out and I was doing SaaS consulting, and I was like, I don't really like this. Like, I'm not that interested in it. It's cool to help people, and I like when my clients are successful, but it's not like if you gave me a bunch of free time, I would do it in my free time, right? When I started to get sort of traction on social media, I actually really liked that. And I was like, oh, I really enjoy studying how LinkedIn works, how Twitter works, how Instagram works, how to write a newsletter, how to chop up content, how to do all this different stuff. Like, I became obsessed with that. And so rather than sit around and do work I didn't enjoy, I started pivoting and focusing towards my obsession. And the reason that I think I've been much more successful monetarily and from a feel-good standpoint and enjoying my work is because I love it. And I think people are struggling. This will come off arrogant, and I don't mean for it to sound that way, but like, I feel like it's hard to compete with me on creating content and churning out a bunch of stuff because I love doing it. And other people are forcing themselves, and I'm loving it. So like, I don't know, that feels like a really tough thing to compete with. And so therefore, I always recommend finding that thing you're obsessed with, making sure that you can figure out how to monetize it and then going all in on it. Because if you do, you're going to be unbeatable.
Right. Yeah, I will say I've been there because after my sales and marketing jobs that I've held with companies, I also first foraged into doing that as a service for clients. And yeah, like you said, it's certainly a step in the right direction. But if you do find out, wait, actually, like you said, this is not something I would do in my free time, then it's perhaps not the actual obsession that you should dive into. I remember listening to an episode of the Tim Ferriss show a while ago. And the takeaway I get from a lot of your content and what you just said as well is that it's very much about niching into a particular subject that you are passionate about. But one thing that Tim Ferriss says, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that at some point, it's not necessarily the thing itself that people follow you for. Yes, you're good at it, and yes, you're clearly an expert, but it's the fact that you're so excited about it that people follow you. So the question is, to what degree should you niche down into one thing, or is it okay to also try and share with the world other passions instead of just one? I can see one side there's kind of the risk of dilution happening. You're no longer known as, in your case, perhaps the LinkedIn guy, the content expert. If you also forage into, I don't know, NFTs, just saying the first thing that comes to mind. What's your take on that?
I mean, I think there's a lot of talk around how having a niche isn't really important. Mm-hmm. Most people who say that, I find, have a niche, whether they are cognizant of it or not. So I do think that if you want to start to attract, the ideal follower or customer, you sort of have to be known for something, especially early on. So right. For example, like, it's easy to point out people who are wildly popular that don't have a niche, but generally they started with one, right? Like, even take Gary Vaynerchuk, right? I'm just pulling the first sort of big name out of my mind that I'm thinking about. And like, in the beginning, he was the wine guy, right? Like, he was the guy doing wine videos on YouTube. And as he started to understand YouTube, he sort of became the YouTube guy, and then the social media guy, and then the digital agency guy. And now he's a bunch of things, right? Now he's NFTs and digital agency and positivity and all these different things, right? I mean, he can afford to. He's got millions and millions and millions and millions of followers who have been following him on a very long journey. So he's kind of the wrong guy to look at when you're just getting started. I think about it as like concentric circles, right? That you start with one that's really tight, you go really deep into that niche, and it should be something that you're obsessed with. You get really, really good at it. And then you just sort of expand outwards a little bit. And as you expand outwards, just slightly bigger each time, you accrue more followers, you accrue more potential customers, and hopefully you don't alienate those early customers because it's still, a micro topic amongst the larger topic. And so to me, it's like, you should start with one. I think over time, the best way to figure out where to go is a combination of your obsession and what your customers are telling you. And if you can find a good intersection there, I mean, I think over time you can certainly broaden.
Makes total sense, like you said, because I took Tim Ferriss as an example. Yeah, he also started as an investor, if I recall, or he had this one book about the 4-hour work week that's really made him super popular. And now he has his show where he talks about all kinds of things. But yeah, like you said, you start there. That's a really good way of putting it. I want to segue a little bit into the day a bit, because all of this, we're talking about running a business like this that can grow to an audience of millions and thousands or tens of thousands of customers, but you do it on your own. You do it as a solo entrepreneur, which leads me to my question. Automation will probably play at least some role in that. You try to automate repetitive tasks that take up a lot of time. Which parts of your business have you automated?
I mean, a lot. I've automated my whole coaching program. I've automated my newsletter sponsorship program. I've automated most of my content production. There's so many different things that I've automated. The general sort of framework that I go through to figure out what to work on is I start by looking at, what I can get rid of. And for the most part, like, we do so many things. there are so many things that we do that are not meaningful to our business and we actually don't like doing. So I look for things that are like not meaningful, I don't like, aren't related to my business, and I eliminate those things. The next thing I do is I look at my calendar and say, what can be simplified? Like, what is something that's currently way too complicated that can be made much easier? Once I've simplified things, then I automate things. Like a perfect example is in my advising business, and I still advise some SaaS companies on the side. It used to be like this back and forth where it's like send an email, then they would send an email, then I would send my packages, and then I would send them to a Stripe page, and then they would pay, and then I would send them a Google Drive folder, and like it was so much work. And I've just automated that with, I think, Zapier, Kajabi, Airtable, and Calendly. So that's a perfect example. And then the last thing that I do is just try and delegate things as often as possible. So what's generally left on my calendar is creative work. And so if I can't automate something, I'll delegate it. If I can't delegate something, I'll automate it. If I hate it, I'll get rid of it. If it's too complicated, I'll simplify it. Everything else that's left over is the creative work that's to be done by me.
Who do you delegate it to?
I have a virtual assistant.
Could you explain how does that work and how is that different from an employee?
Yeah, so I have 0 employees. I use an outsourced firm called Zirtual, Zirtual, and they give me like a part-time 20-hour a week virtual assistant. And really, she doesn't do much more than manage my inbox, take care of some customer success inquiries, customize invoices, do a bunch of admin stuff that I don't generally like doing. But that's really it. And so the way that I kind of teach her is I record process documents and process videos. So for example, if a customer wants some sort of custom invoice, which my software doesn't offer, this is a kind of a number one request, so I'm just top of mind. I will write out an instruction manual, steps 1 to 15 on how to build a custom invoice. And then I'll record a video of my screen of me doing it. I'll store it in Notion. I'll train her on how to do that and then forward all the invoice requests to her. And then she can, instead of asking me a question, she can read the instructions, she can watch the video, and those things all happen in the background. So I love to delegate admin tasks that are generally not creative and also are incredibly distracting, because I think that people forget taking 10 minutes to do a custom invoice doesn't really take 10 minutes. It takes 45 minutes of your day away. You got to pivot from what you're doing, go over there, read your inbox, do all the work, try and get back into your groove. And it ends up just really screwing your day up. And so that's why a VA, a virtual assistant, is so important to me.
Right. I can totally imagine. And I think the beauty of it can be that whereas for you, creative work is the core activity that you want to be able to do the most, perhaps what is repetitive or draining to you can be as much of a passion for someone else. So if you delegate it to them, it's a win-win. I also like how you mentioned Notion, because on this channel, this niche is highly centered on productivity tech, which Notion is certainly a big player in. What are the tools you use in general to run your business? You don't have to give a full list, but perhaps the ones that make the biggest impact for you.
Yeah, my business is all sort of centered around Kajabi, which I used to have like a website that I built on one platform, and I used to sell through Gumroad, and I would also take PayPal and all these different things. Whereas Kajabi is just my website, my landing pages, my email marketing, my courses, my hosting, my payments, my blog, like everything, my newsletter. And so it's sort of my core central hub for my business. Notion is the hub for organization. So it's where all my process documents, my business roadmap, my product roadmap, my social media sort of system that I use, all that stuff lives in Notion. And then there are some other tools that sort of are on the outside, which are like, I use Hype Fury, which is a publishing tool for Twitter and LinkedIn. I use Blackmagic, which helps me, .so, which helps me, build a better Twitter network. Let's see, I use testimonial.to, which is an automated testimonials service. So whenever someone leaves a testimonial for one of my courses, with one click of a button, I can approve it and have it automatically appear on my landing page with no work at all. Just click the heart button and it's on my landing page. And so there's a lot of different software that I use, but the core of my business is Kajabi and the core of my personal productivity is Notion.
I see sometimes in the comments when I review a certain piece of productivity tech that they find it expensive if it is, in the productivity tech space, to task managers, project managers, including Notion, it seems to be between the $5 to $10 a month price point. So if it's anything above that, people sometimes already shy away of it because they kind of focus on loss aversion, which is a very hard instinct to overcome. But for you and for me as well, in increasing amounts, and hopefully everybody in the future, it's actually something that helps you get back so much more in the long run. They are investments. They're not just costs. If it's a tool that can automate away a lot of tasks for you or help you do things so much faster, then you should focus on that instead of how much it costs. And sometimes bothers me a bit how even entrepreneurs that are making good money still focus so much on the price that it costs instead of looking at the potential gain it can give them. Is that something you've struggled with perhaps as well, perhaps in the past or in the beginning stages? What's your take on that? And what would you say to people who feel that way?
I generally, well, I started with much fewer tools when I was making less money and I was brand new to being a solopreneur and all these different things. I kind of went out and found fast, cheap, easy things to use because I think tools for the most part can very much overcomplicate things and become sort of a moat from like, not a moat, but like a bottleneck, excuse me, for you to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So I started with really free and easy tools that I already knew how to use. As my business grew, I looked for opportunities to plug in technology where the return on investment made sense. So for example, if a piece of, let's just say you value your time like at $1,000 an hour, right? You just have this aspirational sort of hourly value. You say, all right, I value this aspirational value, hourly value at $1,000, and this piece of software costs $60 a month. It's pretty expensive, but if it saves you 2 hours of time, then it's a $60 a month, spend to essentially get back $2,000 of your valuable time. And so I think about those things in terms of cost, like when I'm thinking about time savings. And there's other pieces of software that don't necessarily save time, but improve the likelihood that somebody spends money with me. So testimonial.to is a great example of that. It's $60 a month, which is generally pretty expensive, but one of my courses is $150 a month, or excuse me, $150. So if testimonial.to, by splashing my landing pages with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of high quality testimonials, if they help one person make a decision to buy a course, it's already paid for itself 2 times over and more. So I generally think about what kind of revenue can this tool help me make and how much time can this tool get back from me. And so I try and make smart choices. I don't want to get tool creep where I have so many different tools that it's wildly expensive, but my business costs about $620 a month to run. And for the revenue that I make, that's a really good deal.
Yeah, that's crazy. I think you've said on LinkedIn or Twitter that your margins are somewhere in the 90% range, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, they're around 95%. Yeah, I mean, Stripe right away takes 2.9, and then maybe it's 94. I don't really have it exactly, but it's in the mid 90s for sure.
Wow, that's so powerful. That is the power of digital businesses right there.
For sure.
And I love how you talk about this, where it's really, beyond the cost is about the time that you can also assign a value to. And I also think it ties into your core philosophy, going back to doing what you want, where you want, and most importantly, when you want, or I guess how much time you want to spend with your family, with other folks that are important to you. Those are all things to consider when deciding on a tool or any business purchase for that matter. Is there anything that you've transferred from your business philosophy or tools to your personal life?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a really good question. I generally have transferred maybe a lot of the systems that I use. This may sound really weird, but like I struggle to be, what's the best way to put this? I struggle to just enjoy free time sometimes. I like for everything to kind of have a system and a place, and my schedule is pretty consistent and rigid. And so I bring a lot of that sort of rigidity and systems and processes from my current role as chief revenue, or my former role as chief revenue officer, my current role as a solopreneur, into like a lot of different things. Like my wife and I are looking at buying a home, and like, I'll bring a process to that. When we look at our finances, I'll bring a process to that. There's just like, and whether that's healthier or not is like up for debate. But I certainly like to bring systems from business into my personal life. And I find that when I do that, I feel less stress. I feel more organized. It doesn't mean that I live the most exciting, free time life all the time when I'm bringing systems and processes. But like when I go on vacation, I certainly don't bring those. So, I hope at some point in time that I can bring less of those to my personal life. But that's probably the thing that translates, most seamlessly.
Sure. Well, I'm smiling because I'm very, very similar in that regard, and the examples you named even. So I'm definitely going to show this to my partner. I'm sure she'll chuckle and say, yes, this is exactly you as well. You said it sounds a bit weird. To me, it doesn't. And I think to many folks watching this that are part of my audience, they don't, because we're all about these kinds of systems. We love geeking out over this. Speaking of that, to a degree, sometimes we are facing big project, whether that's business or in our personal lives. And one of my key takeaways from your content is that you are able very well to break things down into digestible pieces. And I feel like that's also a core part of your approach to business and perhaps to life in general. So if someone is staring a big project in the face and they feel a bit overwhelmed, what would your advice be to them?
Yeah, I think, it's sort of that old adage where I forget who said it. I think everything that people can't remember who said it gets attributed to Abraham Lincoln, but I think in this situation, it's actually true, where he said, like, if you gave me 5 hours to cut down a tree or something like that, I'd spend the first 4 hours sort of sharpening my axe. And the whole takeaway is really preparation. What I might think through is, whenever people are approaching a daunting task, they generally tend to dive headfirst in and get really, really deep into the granular complexities of this really monstrous task. And I think that's really, really challenging. And so what I would try and do is break the task down into smaller parts. So for example, if you want to grow on Twitter, right, it can be extremely intimidating to say, like, oh my gosh, there's so many different things that I have to do. And like, you dive right in, you start trying to write, and you're trying to network, and you're trying to DM, and like, it can be very overwhelming. Instead of being like, okay, in order to grow on Twitter, I'm going to make a hypothesis that there's a few important things to do. First thing to do, set up my profile effectively. Next thing to do is figure out what I want to write about. The third thing, build a writing schedule. The fourth thing, figure out how to take the tweets that are doing well and turn them into threads. The fifth thing, try and figure out who I should be interacting with online, right? And then instead of going and doing all those 5 things, start with the first one for a week. Just go out there, tinker with your profile, make it great. When you get it to a place that you feel pretty confident, stop, move to the second thing, right? Next thing we're going to figure out is what I want to talk about, right? Brainstorm on that for a week till you nail something down. It's just like very, very stepwise, right? And so I just try and break things down in a way that to me makes sense. And I try and get from 0 to 1, basically like from bad to serviceable, instead of trying to make everything perfect before I go out and do anything. I just want to get it from bad to serviceable, each little part. And then once the parts are all serviceable, then let's move them from serviceable to good, right? And then good to great, and then great to excellent, with the idea and the outlook that it's going to take a long time. And I think the other part of approaching a really big project is that a lot of people approach it with incredible urgency, even though there isn't always urgency behind the actual thing they're trying to do. They should be thinking about it as a very long game play, a very long-term strategy. And that's not with everything, but that's with a lot of things. Self-imposed urgency has the ability to kind of really force us into a crazy rabbit hole where it's like, if we think long-term, not everything has to be perfect. So that's my best advice, is break it down into chunks and then move those chunks forward sort of step by step from basic levels of quality to high quality over time.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I learned that lesson a couple of years ago. My source was the book Getting Things Done by David Allen. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
I am. Yep.
Oh, cool. Very cool. So he also speaks of projects, they're just multi-step outcomes. You need to break it down to the next action. What is the first next thing I can do? And if it's a very new and intimidating thing, yeah, break it down as far as you can to make it digestible. But over time, especially with projects that are a bit repetitive, which for me, for example, that would be creating a YouTube video every week. When I created my first video almost 2 years ago, it was super intimidating, and I had never recorded myself like this. I had never edited a video, etc. So I had to truly break down writing the scripts chapter by chapter, for example, editing minute by minute, for example, because it just took so long. But over time, as you get better at things, it's important not to forget that you need to break it down, not to as much as you can, but as much as you need to. Because now I'm almost 2 years further, I can just write script as the next action, and I can take care of it because it no longer intimidates me on that level. I can take care of it.
100%.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we're almost out of time, Justin. I think this was super insightful. So I want to thank you for your time. And my last question, where can people find you and what for? Well, I guess the last part is already pretty clear by now, but still perhaps in your own words.
Yeah, sure. So they can reach me at my website, which is Justin Welsh, that's WELSH.me, justinwelsh.me. And, I think sort of the core part of my website is my newsletter, which is called the Saturday Solopreneur. And it goes out to right now 35,000 people every week, every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the States. And they'll generally get one audience and business growth tip that they can read and apply in less than 4 minutes guaranteed. And so that's a great place to start if you're looking to grow your audience, if you're looking to grow your business, if you're looking to productize your services. I try and give a very, very actionable tip every week. If you want to get micro tips in between that, you can follow me on Twitter at the Justin Welsh, or you can go to LinkedIn and just type in my name, Justin Welsh.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure to leave all the links down below in the description. Justin Welsh, thank you so much for your time.
Lucas, appreciate it, man.